Imagine being told that if you broke up with your boyfriend, you had to give back his class ring, his sweater, or even his varsity jacket, or else people would think you were being disrespectful, not just to him, but to the whole social order at school. Sounds extreme, right? Or how about this? If you were a girl in the 1950s, you couldn't call a boy to ask him out. That wasn't just frowned upon. It was basically a scandal. You were supposed to sit by the phone and hope he called. If he didn't, you stayed home. Dating in the 1950s wasn't just a cute little ritual with jukeboxes and milkshakes. It was a system, one full of unspoken rules, strange expectations, and rituals that would make most of us today raise an eyebrow or two. It was strict, it was conservative, and sometimes it was just plain weird. In this video, we're diving into 30 of the most unusual, forgotten, and downright strange dating traditions from the 1950s. From rules about who could pay for dinner, to how many days in advance you had to ask someone out, to exactly how close you could sit in a car without someone judging you. The list is wild, and the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. By the end, you'll be wondering how anyone in the 50s ever made it to a second date. To really understand why dating in the 1950s was so strange, you have to look at the world people were living in back then. America had just come out of World War II. Soldiers were back home, people were starting families, and society was trying to settle down into something stable. That meant rules, lots of them. The 1950s were all about tradition, family values, church on Sundays, and very clear roles for men and women. Men were expected to be the providers. Women were expected to be sweet, polite, and ready to become housewives. Dating wasn't about fun or romance. It was training for marriage. Teenagers were just starting to become their own thing. A real youth culture was emerging. But even as they went to sock hops, listened to Elvis, and snuck into drive-in movies, they were still expected to play by the rules. And there were a lot of them. Parents had a huge say in who you could date, when you could date, and what you could do on a date. Religion played a role too, especially when it came to physical boundaries. Even schools would step in with rules about dancing and dress codes. So when we look at these strange traditions, they didn't come out of nowhere. They were shaped by a society that was deeply conservative, obsessed with appearances, and terrified of anything that seemed too fast. Dating in the 50s wasn't just about falling in love. It was about following the script or risking your reputation. In the 1950s, if you were dating someone regularly, you weren't just seeing each other. You were going steady. And that meant something serious, like practically one step away from engagement. Going steady wasn't just about spending time together. It was a public declaration. When a couple decided to go steady, the guy would usually give the girl something symbolic, like his class ring, his Letterman jacket, or even his school pin. She'd wear it to show the world, "I'm taken." These tokens weren't just romantic, they were social currency. If a girl wore her boyfriend's jacket in the school hallway, it was a sign of status. People knew who was paired up and who was still available. There was even pressure to go steady, because being single too long made others talk. But breaking up was just as formal. If the relationship ended, you were expected to return the ring or the jacket. Holding on to it was seen as petty or immature. And if someone tried to start dating someone new before the breakup was officially acknowledged, drama, big drama. Parents often approved of going steady because it seemed more serious and less risky than casual dating. But it also came with expectations. Less flirting with others, more parental involvement, and sometimes even discussions about the future. For teenagers, it felt like a real relationship. But looking back, it was more like a structured program. You had your symbol, your rules, your timeline, and stepping out of line wasn't just a relationship issue, it was a reputation killer. Dating in the 1950s came with an invisible rule book, and it was strict. Everyone was expected to follow it, especially women. It didn't matter if you were 15 or 25. These rules defined what was acceptable behavior, and breaking them could seriously hurt your reputation. First, a girl was never supposed to ask a boy out. That was seen as too forward, even desperate. The guy had to make the first move every time. If he didn't call, you waited. No chasing, no second chances, no making the first call. Just wait and hope. Once the date was set, there were rules about everything, even what to wear. Women were expected to dress up, do their hair, and wear makeup, even for casual outings. Men had to show up clean, neat, and preferably in a pressed shirt. If a guy showed up looking messy, it reflected badly on both of them. Being on time was essential. A guy arriving late was considered disrespectful, and if a girl wasn't ready when he arrived, it could ruin the night. He was also expected to walk to the door, not honk the horn. That was considered incredibly rude. There were even rules for behavior during the date. The man had to pay, always. No exceptions. If a woman offered, it was often seen as an insult. He was also expected to open doors, pull out chairs, and walk on the curb side of the sidewalk. All part of showing respect and being a gentleman. Even body language mattered. A girl laughing too loud, slouching in her seat, or seeming too eager could be judged harshly. These etiquette rules weren't just about manners. They were a way to control how people interacted, especially women. Looking back, a lot of it seems more like performance than romance. In the 1950s, dating didn't just involve two people. It often involved two families. Parents, especially the girls, played a major role in who she could date, when she could go out, and what was allowed. Before a boy could even take a girl out, he was often expected to call the house and ask for permission. This wasn't just about setting up the date. It was a test. How polite was he? Did he sound respectful? In some cases, boys were even expected to come by the house ahead of time and introduce themselves properly, like a formal interview for a teenage relationship. Once the date began, things didn't get more private. Many dates were chaperoned, especially for younger teens. That might mean a younger sibling tagging along, or even a group of couples all going out together to keep things safe. The idea was simple: no privacy, no temptation. Meeting the parents wasn't something you saved for later. It happened early, sometimes before the first official date. It was seen as a sign of respect and also gave the parents a chance to judge if you were a good influence. There were also strict curfews, especially for girls. If she wasn't home by 10 p.m. sharp, there were consequences, sometimes grounding, sometimes a full investigation. And if a boy brought her home late, he might never be allowed back. Parents weren't just watching, they were setting the tone. In the 1950s, dating was seen as a step toward marriage, not just fun. So families took it seriously, really seriously. So what actually happened on a date in the 1950s? It might seem simple on the surface. Dinner, a movie, maybe a dance. But beneath that, there were a whole set of expectations, limits, and unspoken rules. First off, the guy planned everything. He picked the place, the time, and even what they'd do afterward. If the girl had opinions, she was expected to keep them to herself, at least publicly. The idea was that a man showed leadership by taking charge of the date. At the start of the evening, he'd often bring a small gift: flowers, a corsage if it was a formal dance, or sometimes candy. These gestures were expected, not optional, especially on big occasions like proms or homecoming. The classic 1950s date often meant going to the movies. But more than that, it meant the drive-in. Cars had changed the dating scene completely. They gave couples a private space away from home and parents. That freedom made drive-ins hugely popular, but also controversial. Parents called it a make-out zone, and in many towns, there were actual patrols or curfews around them. Holding hands was fine. A quick kiss at the end of the night, acceptable, but anything more was dangerous territory. There were no open conversations about boundaries, consent, or what people were comfortable with. Instead, everything relied on tradition and guesswork, and the fear of ruining your reputation. One strange tradition: the guy almost always ordered the food for both people, especially on a dinner date. It wasn't unusual for him to say, "She'll have the salad," while she just smiled and nodded. It sounds bizarre now, but back then it was considered gentlemanly. And the date wasn't over until the girl was walked safely to her front door. No shortcuts. If a guy honked the horn or dropped her off at the curb, that could be the last date he ever got. In the 1950s, a date was more than a date. It was a performance, with high stakes and a strict script. Eating out on a date in the 1950s wasn't just about enjoying a meal. It was a social ritual, packed with rules and silent expectations, especially for women. For starters, women were expected to order light. That meant nothing messy, nothing too expensive, and definitely nothing that suggested a big appetite. A girl digging into a giant steak or slurping spaghetti? That was a red flag. It wasn't ladylike. Instead, salad, soup, or something dainty was the safe bet. But here's the twist. Most of the time, she didn't even get to order for herself. The guy was supposed to order for both of them. He'd ask what she wanted, then tell the waiter her choice. It was considered polite, even romantic, for the man to take the lead. Today, it might feel controlling. Back then, it was expected. Table manners were also under a microscope. No elbows on the table, napkin in your lap. Eat slowly, laugh quietly. Everything was about maintaining a clean image, especially for girls. One slip, chewing with your mouth open, laughing too loud, could instantly damage your reputation. And of course, the man always paid. Splitting the check was unheard of, and a woman offering to pay could be seen as insulting or even emasculating. The date was his responsibility from start to finish. Even the way they sat mattered. A woman shouldn't sit with her back to the door. A man should pull out her chair. And no one got up from the table until everyone was finished. Dining out in the 1950s wasn't about relaxing or having fun. It was another test of manners, of class, and of knowing your role. If there was one place where 1950s dating traditions really came alive, it was the high school dance. These weren't just fun social events. They were structured, symbolic, and full of unwritten rules. Most dances followed a very clear system. Boys asked the girls. That was non-negotiable. If a girl asked a boy, it was seen as desperate. Unless it was Sadie Hawkins' day. That was the one exception. A novelty dance where girls were allowed to take the lead. But even that felt more like a gimmick than actual progress. Corsages were a must. For school dances, the guy had to buy a flower arrangement for his date to wear. And not just any flower. It had to match her dress. Getting it wrong wasn't just awkward, it was embarrassing. For prom or homecoming, this gesture was even more serious. No corsage. You were considered careless or cheap. At the dance itself, there were rules about who could dance with whom. Going steady, then you stuck with your partner. Single, you had to wait for someone to ask you. Girls didn't go up and make the first move. They waited on the sidelines, hoping to be chosen. Being left out was more than disappointing. It could seriously hurt your reputation. Then there were the group events. Double dating was huge. Not only did it give people a chance to socialize, but it also acted as a built-in chaperone system. You were less likely to cross the line if other people were around. Some schools even had rules about lights-out times or banned certain songs that were too suggestive. And believe it or not, some schools separated slow dances and fast dances, with teachers watching to make sure no one got too close. Dating at social events in the 1950s was fun, sure, but only if you played by the rules. In the 1950s, love came with accessories. If you were in a relationship, you didn't just tell people, you showed them, and you did that through symbols and tokens that made your status crystal clear. The most common one, the class ring. When a boy gave his girlfriend his ring, it was like a mini engagement. It meant they were going steady. But she didn't just wear it as is. To make it fit, girls would wrap yarn around the band or wear it on a chain around their neck. It was visible proof that she belonged to someone. Letterman jackets were another big one. If a guy gave his girl his school jacket, that was a serious sign of commitment. The oversized fit made it obvious. She was wearing his jacket, and everyone at school would know it. Some boys gave their girlfriends their school pins or even dog tags if they were in the military. In more serious cases, promise rings came into play. These weren't engagement rings, but they carried that kind of weight, a pledge that marriage might be in the future. These items weren't just sentimental, they were social signals. If you wore a ring or jacket, people knew not to flirt with you. If you broke up and kept the ring, that could cause drama. You were expected to return it out of respect, and these tokens went both ways. Girls might give guys a photograph, a handkerchief, or even a locket, small but meaningful symbols of connection. Back then, love wasn't private. It came with signs, signals, and souvenirs, all meant to show the world exactly where your heart was. Communication during the dating process in the 1950s was full of boundaries, most of them completely one-sided. For starters, a girl never called a boy. That was one of the biggest taboos. If she did, it could make her look too eager, too bold, or worst of all, easy. Instead, she waited. If the boy didn't call, the date didn't happen. Phone calls were always made to the house, not to the person directly. That meant dealing with parents. A boy had to be respectful, polite, and make small talk with whoever answered before asking to speak to their daughter. If he wasn't charming enough on the phone, that could be the end of the line. Letters were also a common way to stay in touch, especially if someone was away at college or in the military. Handwritten notes filled with affection and promise were considered romantic, and in some cases, they were saved for decades. Now let's talk about getting physical. This was where things got really strict. Public displays of affection were discouraged, especially early on. Holding hands was acceptable. A kiss on the cheek at the end of the night? Fine. But anything beyond that? Not in public, and not without consequences. There were even different terms for it. Necking meant kissing and cuddling. Petting meant more intimate touching, and that was considered dangerous territory, not just socially but morally. A girl who went too far risked her entire reputation. And here's the part no one talked about. There was almost zero conversation around consent. Physical boundaries were enforced by social rules, not actual communication. That left a lot of room for confusion, pressure, and shame. Dating was romantic, sure, but it came with a long list of don'ts. Dating in the 1950s didn't end when the date was over. It ended when the girl was home, safe, and inside the house on time. Curfews were strict, and they were usually set by the parents, not the teenagers. Missing one, even by a few minutes, could cause serious trouble. Most girls had to be home by 10 p.m. on weeknights, maybe 11 on weekends if the parents were feeling generous. And it wasn't just about being late, it was about where you were, who you were with, and what you were doing. Parents often waited up, sitting by the window or the door, ready to ask 100 questions the moment their daughter walked in. The boy was expected to walk the girl to the door, say goodnight politely, and leave. Hanging around, lingering in the car, or sneaking in an extra kiss, that could lead to gossip. Or worse, a bad reputation. It wasn't just parents who were watching. Neighbors paid attention. Teachers noticed. Even shop owners and church members had opinions. Small towns especially had a way of turning one late night or one handhold in public into a full-blown scandal. The pressure to appear proper at all times meant that dating was rarely private. It was constantly being observed, judged, and talked about. In the 1950s, the question wasn't just how was your date, it was also who saw you. Some dating traditions from the 1950s were so specific, so oddly detailed, they almost feel like parody today. But back then, they were taken completely seriously. Take calling cards, for example. Before a boy could officially date a girl, he might be expected to come by her house just to introduce himself, not even for a date, just to meet the parents and leave his information. It was like a job interview for future courtship, and if a parent didn't like what they saw during that visit, the dating door closed immediately. Then there was the Wednesday rule. If a boy didn't ask a girl out for the weekend by Wednesday, she was supposed to turn him down. Saying yes to a last-minute invitation was considered desperate. It meant you didn't have better offers. So if a guy waited too long, too bad. Another strange rule: men always had to walk on the outside, closest to the street, when walking with a woman. It was considered gentlemanly, based on the idea of protecting her from passing cars, splashes, or, weirdly, runaway horses, left over from much earlier times. Some traditions got even more specific. For example, if you went to a dance, certain slow songs were off-limits because they encouraged couples to get too close. Teachers or chaperones would step in and break it up if they thought things were getting too cozy. There were also food rules. Girls weren't supposed to order crunchy or sloppy foods on a date. Anything that could make noise or a mess was discouraged. Apples, corn on the cob, ribs? Definitely no. And finally, even seating in the car had rules. A girl wasn't supposed to scoot all the way over to the guy's side unless they were going steady. Sitting close too soon could be seen as improper or worse, an invitation. These quirky rules might seem harmless today, but in the 1950s, they helped decide your reputation, your relationship status, and your entire social life. Looking back, the dating traditions of the 1950s feel like they're from another planet. And in some ways, they are. Today, dating is often casual, flexible, and based on mutual conversation. People meet through apps, text each other freely, and split the bill without thinking twice. Gender roles are less rigid, consent is openly discussed, and personal boundaries are expected, not assumed. You can call first, ask someone out, or even propose no matter who you are. Compare that to the 1950s, where dating was scripted like a play. Boys led, girls followed. Everyone had a role, and stepping outside it could cost you your social standing. Even things as small as who ordered dinner or how close you sat in a car were judged by the rules of proper behavior. But not everything was bad. Some people look back fondly on the clear expectations, the effort put into every date, and the sense of romance tied to simple gestures, a corsage, a Letterman jacket, or a promise ring. There was a structure to dating, and for some, that structure made things feel safe and serious. Still, there's no denying how much pressure came with those rules. Image mattered more than comfort. Traditions often overpowered personal choice. Dating today is far from perfect, but it's definitely more free. And when you compare the two eras, you realize just how strange, and sometimes suffocating, love could be back then. The dating world of the 1950s was filled with charm, formality, and a whole lot of strange rules. From curfews and calling cards to food restrictions and going steady symbols, it wasn't just about finding love, it was about following the script. Some of these traditions now seem sweet, like exchanging jackets or slow dancing at sock hops. Others feel downright bizarre, like needing to ask a girl out by Wednesday or never ever letting her order her own food. And behind it all was a system built on strict gender roles, appearances, and public approval. It's easy to laugh at these customs now, but they also reveal a lot about the culture of the time, what people feared, what they valued, and how deeply they believed in structure over spontaneity. The world has changed, and dating has evolved with it. What was once seen as romantic might now feel restrictive. What used to be scandalous might now be normal. But in every era, dating reflects the society around it. So the next time someone complains about ghosting or bad dates, just remember, at least no one's judging you for ordering ribs. Here are a few extra quirks that didn't quite fit anywhere else, but are too weird to leave out. Some etiquette books told girls to pretend they didn't understand sports, even if they did, to make boys feel smarter. Others suggested always bringing a mirror but never using it in front of your date. That was considered vain. And get this, at some schools, if a girl wore too much perfume, teachers would send her home. Too much scent meant she was trying too hard. Strange times, strange rules, and thankfully, most of them stayed in the past.